can take?
15 minutes. Yeah, the Fulbrighters will go first.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that's what. Oh, okay.
And
So,
then, yeah.
so if they tell me that the Fulbrighters will go first and then you react, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good, good.
Yeah,
So,
as I understand it from the
oh yeah, sorry.
from the
Yeah,
schedule.
sorry.
Yeah, that's how we
no
are.
problem. But
Okay,
now
good.
the time is how long will be how many 10 minutes each or 15?
15.
So each of the Fulbrighters will be having 15 minutes. Since it is organized that way, I am going to transfer to Mamadou Boja to lead for the rest. Again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Usman.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Director, for this introduction. I would like to welcome you all for attending this second series of enrichment events. As you know, this event is put in place to allow Fulbrighters to interact with each other, but also give them the opportunity to present their thoughts and works, but also share the conclusions of their research in order to get feedback from their colleagues, but also allow other people to know what they are working on. And I think it's very important to have this regular meeting. So the first one was held a few months ago, and it was related to the challenges of doing research in Sub-Saharan Africa, in West Africa. We did have two great guest speakers. One of them is Professor Leonardo Villalong, the Dean of the International Center, who had an extensive experience doing research in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the second one was Wendy Wilson-Powell, as you all know, some of you, of course, who also have a very great experience as an anthropologist, traveling across Sub-Saharan Africa, but also doing extensive field work. So that was the first series. But today we're going to be talking about education and curriculum development, because many Fulbrighters are working on this topic. And this issue is so important that it also raises the question of what kind of education our universities, but also our school system are providing. And since independence, the debate over the reform of the education system, but also the content of the education, have been one of the toughest topic, because it is related to the kind of development we want, but also the kind of citizen we build. So it's a very encompassing topic, and we were very delighted to realize that some of Fulbrighters are working on these topics. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to put together this panel, so that we can share, but also raise these questions that we mentioned in the terms of references. So as Professor Usman Sen mentioned, so we're going to be, so you will have, all the presenters will have 15 minutes to talk about their topic, and then, especially Fulbrighters, of course. And then at the end, we will have Professor Mbaicham and our colleague Cindy Cooper jump in and provide also their thought, but also their take on this topic. So without further comment, so we will open the session and start with Jillian. She's going to be talking about critical hybridity, a helpful framework for curriculum development and implementation in Ghana, West Africa. So, Jillian, the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Of course, thank you so much. And hello to everyone. I made the mistake of saying good afternoon, but good morning, afternoon, and evening, and greetings. So I'll talk about my project at the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration at UCC, and just offer some perspectives. I'm just going to talk about my time in Ghana. This isn't the first time I've been in Ghana doing work similar to this. And so just some evolution, my engagements. and then talk about entanglements and complexities of this work. I'll also talk through the concept of critical hybridity, but from the perspective of these authors, Paloma and Zelenzi. I read this a couple of years ago, and it really helped me with my entanglement and complexities. I'll talk about my project and then just offer a call to action, contact information, and references. Okay. I do tend to talk a little fast, so I'm going to try to slow down, but get all of this in. I think when I first started this work, I wanted things to sort of fit very neatly together. I found that many of the things that I'm interested in as a higher ed scholar, I study higher education and how individuals in higher education learn how to do their jobs. I just wanted it to be really neat. I like, when things are neat and organized, and that when things make sense and that they don't take me off direction too much. But what I found is that, particularly since I've been here in September, but then in all my time in Ghana, that I actually am welcoming these concepts of complexity and entanglement. So I liken it to earphones. It's hard to get them untangled, of course, but it's all connected to each other. So these things are connected and interconnected. And so I just want to offer how my thinking has evolved over time as it relates to curriculum development. In particular, curriculum development in the higher ed context. So for individuals who are graduate students, because often when we're talking about curriculum, we're talking about the sort of pre-K through secondary. So how might we approach curriculum development from that higher education perspective and implement it and then test to see how it works. So I began in 2015. I came to Ghana on a really short-term study abroad project to understand, education in the Ghanaian context. I was a doctoral student in counseling and student personnel services at the University of Georgia. And again, was just very interested in how people learn how to do their work, their jobs. I changed my topic pretty quickly because when I came to Ghana, I was struck by all of the questions that I had, but just the opportunity to think more critically about student and community affairs in the context of a country and how the work outside of the classroom that student personnel support service workers were doing were really helping to helping students to understand their role in a larger society. So as I had started this work, I called it kind of intercultural contextualization, and I have my references at the end, but really was trying to understand how two different cultures or seemingly different cultures with some connections took the best of both cultures and then applied it in a context and adapted work to make things work. So my dissertation was a case study at Ashesi University where I studied how student affairs practitioners understood their role, but then also how students, faculty, alumni, and other staff members saw their role on campus. And that's when the sort of entanglement started. I started to see that there were these vestiges, of course, of colonization. There were these critiques of the need to Africanize, but also the desire to Africanize curriculum, and then the kind of ongoing decolonization efforts. And so after leaving my role as a doctoral student and going into being a practitioner, I came back to Ghana in 2018, 2019, and 2020 and brought students, faculty, and staff from the United States to better understand, with my colleague, Dr. Candace Moore, to better understand what education was like and higher education was like in the Ghanaian context. And a couple of years ago, came across this article that really helped me to understand the need for contextualization with the understanding of the story, the complicated histories, the complexities of colonization and decolonization efforts. So since September, I've been working with the Participatory Action Research team to review the courses and programs of studies at IEPA and to think more critically about how we can integrate certain concepts that I'll talk about soon. And why it's important to think about the changing and the evolving nature of this work is that sometimes we approach our topics from one perspective, not understanding that there are multiple ways of seeing our work, but also there are multiple opportunities and how we can work together and build a curriculum for future educators. So like I said, this article was really helpful for me to frame all the work together. In particular, thinking about how the role of the United States and other Western countries in sort of colonizing knowledge. We have almost a global universal adoption of the United States way of education, grading systems, courses of studies, and residential practices. So this knowledge is sort of undergirded by the assumption that US faculty, or US administrators have the specialist knowledge or way of knowing that then can be copied and pasted into other places. But this concept of critical hybridity, which I really have begun to embrace as I understand how Ghana has formulated its work, it's really about how do we adapt to what we know into the context, into the specific context, and not like a copy paste, but more in a critical way of understanding what could work in the context of Ghana or other countries. And then progressing toward this concept of indigeneity. So I often say we go from coloniality through critical hybridity to indigeneity in order to understand what are the values and customs and practices of the culture that then should be integrated within the curriculum. So the IEPA curriculum development project came out of all of my time in Ghana. In particular, I was looking for how do I support what's happening already at the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration. But then also how do we create something different and new that can help to foster a sense for the educators, the faculty, the researchers that we were teaching in the graduate courses to do their work in real time. So the idea is that we would develop and implement and evaluate curriculum around assessment and evaluation in education. So how do we assess students? How do we evaluate our courses? But then also for civic and community engagement, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So the first output is curriculum modules that faculty can use to infuse into their courses. The second is contextualized assessment mechanisms. So case studies and rubrics that are contextualized specifically for Ghana and created with the Ghanaian context in mind. And then the final output is a curriculum course and program review process that IEPA can use as it continues to serve sort of the country of Ghana, but also its call to the West African region. IEPA is a Category 2 UNESCO Institute of Excellence. It was recently named this. So it has a having that category means that it has a role in helping to shape educational planning and administration in Ghana, but then also within the West African region. And then the Sustainable Development Goals have become sort of the catch-all for how we think about what's next and how we plan. But the reason that we're choosing civic and community engagement and infusing it into the curriculum is because of the Sustainable Goal number 17, which is specifically about partnerships that carry through the Sustainable Development Goal and thinking of how are universities partnering with communities and organizations in order to fulfill its mission. The third thing I want to focus and hone in on is that most times when we're talking about curriculum development and curriculum studies, it's talking about that pre-K through secondary. And not very often are we teasing out what and how should curriculum look at the undergraduate and the graduate level. And so the courses, there's a master's and PhD courses, PhD programs at IEPA that focus specifically for current and future administrators, current and future policymakers, current and future professors and researchers. And so that's what our focus is. How does the adult learn and how are we developing curriculum for their context? We also wanted to make sure that the project allowed for continued professional learning for faculty and staff, and that it took a participatory approach. That is, I'm not just creating curriculum and then seeing if it works, but I'm creating curriculum in tandem with a research team. So we approached this through a participatory action research method. The team is made up of IEPA staff, students and faculty, as well as staff and faculty from outside of IEPA, but still at UCC. It's made up of a core team of individuals helping to guide the research process, co-leading with me, and then 3 sub-teams, 1 for curriculum and instruction, 1 for professional learning, and 1 for sustainability. Curriculum and instruction, of course, creating the curriculum and doing the course review. Professional learning is doing the workshops and trainings and learning sessions with faculty and students of IEPA. And then the sustainability team is thinking about that course review plan and how we continue to move forward. I've talked about this a little bit already, but there's a cut, copy, paste, save process that happens. And what critical hybridity has helped for me in particular to think about is how do we take a concept, share knowledge about that concept, interrogate the concept itself, contextualize the concept for, in this case, Ghana, and then create. So I leaned on this concept of equity-centered design, which I'll link as a reference for your information. And so I'm just going to walk through this framework and how we're approaching it on this research team. So first, the concept of assessment, evaluation, and civic and community engagement. In the interest of time, I won't go into the full story, but essentially in working with leadership at IEPA, these were the 2 areas that were identified as possibilities for creating the curriculum. And then in our weekly core team meetings, we talk about how these concepts are currently framed in Ghana, but also from the United States perspective, from my area of a specialty, how it's framed. In the biweekly sub-team meetings, we use the core team, they're the leaders of the sub-teams. We use those sub-team meetings to really talk through what does it look like for each of the sub-teams. So for curriculum and instruction, for professional learning, and for sustainability, what do these concepts look like and how are they framed? And then in the monthly full team meetings, the work is of bringing all of what we are learning and thinking about together through literature reviews and practice reviews to talk through how to share knowledge between us so that not one is privileged over the other, but rather we're sharing knowledge between Ghana and then from my perspective from the United States. Then we use a course review framework. I'm happy to share that after this to review the courses and develop key comparative and contextual questions. So this is where we're spending most of our time right now, is really reviewing each course, each class at IEPA, and then developing key comparative and contextual questions. And then in the contextualizing piece, the core team and I are working for our August meeting to begin to contextualize the key concepts and think about these core questions. How might we contextualize this concept for Ghana? Because some of it is already happening, particularly in IEPA. What are the key elements, perspectives, and ideas that must be included? This is from the cultural historical perspective. And how can we draw from the context to elucidate this concept? So this is really about the development of case studies and rubrics along these lines. And then it's the creation. The curriculum and instruction team have already begun to create some pieces of the curriculum, but each of these teams will have a role in not only creating the curriculum, but then also workshopping it out to our colleagues in IEPA through workshops. We'll get feedback from the workshops about the curriculum to then to feed into the sustainability plan. So the sustainability portion is project evaluation, which is ongoing. So after every sort of phase of the project, we're evaluating to see where we are and how we're doing. The sustainability portion is also about buy-in and incentives. How do we incentivize this work? And then the risk benefit analysis, again, is ongoing, is how's this going to improve IEPA and help with their mission, but also how is it going to support faculty in their professional learning and students in their work? And then coordinating timeframe and scheduling. I'll wrap up really briefly with a call to action. And this is for everyone who's doing this work. It really is about less following a proposed plan and saying we're going to do this and this and this. And it's more about paying attention to all of the factors that impact curriculum and impact the implementation of curriculum. And this is also interrupting the concept that faculty is the main expert. But in our work, what we're finding is that students have an idea about how they want to learn, and staff also have an idea about how students may need to learn in the classroom, particularly around assessment and evaluation and civic and community engagement. So I promise the references here, and thank you all for your time. I think you're muted. You're muted.
Oh, still. Okay. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation of your research project. And I really like this idea of complexity and entanglement, which for me is very important, because one of the critical things that always come up when designing a curriculum is how the appropriation of concepts, but also making sure that they are in line with the reality on the ground. And I think it's very interesting, the methodology you use basically to come up with this, to show how this process of designing a curriculum can bring together different actors, but also, each bringing his own perception, but also conception of what it means to teach, but also to appropriate the content of the teaching, but also how concepts can be embedded in the reality of a specific country. And one point that you raised that I think also is very important is usually this expert-centered curriculum design, which sometimes is not necessarily the best way of, going about designing a curriculum, because on the ground we see that teachers, for example, as you mentioned, are one of the main experts, because they are the one doing this job every day, every single day. But also students' perspective is also very important, because they are the one receiving the training, and they are the one assessing the way the training is being delivered. So I really enjoy the presentation. So I don't know if Dr. said.
Yeah, that was, and we appreciated your presentation, really. I noted one thing which is essential in the African context, including civic engagement in what we do in the classroom. It's extremely important, because the Francophone system, or even maybe the Anglophone, I don't know, never make room for civic engagement, and civic engagement is something which should absolutely be increased and increasingly taught in the African context. Maybe we'll come back to the presentation after listening to others, or we are going to react as a group afterwards, right?
Yeah, we're going to react afterwards.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to move to the next presentation. Michael, Dr. Michael Takafor Ndemanu, who is an associate. Julian, I didn't present you actually. Okay, I'm going to catch up. So Jillian is currently a Fulbright US scholar to Ghana, where she is teaching and doing research at the University of Cape Coast. So her research topic, so we mentioned. So, but if you can go through basically the term of references, because you have the whole bio. So now let's move to Dr. Michael, who is an associate professor in multicultural education, social foundation in education, curriculum theory, and comparative international education at Ball State University. And currently a Fulbright US scholar in Cameroon at the University Ngaoundéré. His research topic is infusing 21st century skill in college curriculum for socioeconomic transformation. So Dr. Michael. The floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Just let me move stuff around, please. Just give me a second. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. This is, as Aliun introduced me, this is Michael Ndemanu, currently at the University of Ngaoundere. I came to this topic, my interest in general in education stems from my prior experience as a public school teacher in Cameroon to 2006 when I immigrated to the United States. And when I came to the United States, I studied curriculum and instruction with a focus on curriculum studies and multicultural education and social foundations in education. And during my time at Indiana University, Bloomington, I got the opportunity to interact with the founder of a school, Bloomington Project School. That was a charter school where they were doing a lot of project learning, and I even enrolled my children in that school. And I got an opportunity to to study the practice of some of the theories that I was learning in my doctoral program. And so my interest developed in this area, and I've been working on a lot of projects related to African educational system. We've been organizing conferences, transformative education conferences in Africa. We had one in Kakamega, Kenya in 2019, and we plan to have one in the University of Cape Coast in 2023. So the way I designed this presentation today, I thought it was a way for me to share what I'm working on. And so I approach it more from the angle of professional development, sharing how to go about some of these skills, 21st century skills in the curriculum. So I will go straight into this and the introduction. So just thinking about the rise in knowledge-based economy that is driving the demand for higher education. Why are people going to college? Why are people going to universities? It's because the skills that the society needs for economic and socio-political empowerment requires that higher education. And so knowledge-based economy is driving the demand for higher education. And if we look in the previous centuries, we started with agrarian economies and then moved to industrial revolution. Then now we are in a knowledge-based economy. So thinking about the role of higher education, because when we talk about curriculum development, as Gillian was discussing earlier, there is a need for us to connect the society and the content and what we do in our classrooms. But that is but that's not what I'm seeing in the classrooms that I've been observing in Cameroon during my Fulbright program, or even prior to that when I was a teacher. So it tends to be something that was handed down many years ago, maybe by Europeans when the continent was still colonized. And although different countries are doing different works in terms of remodeling and improving, making the curriculum more relevant to the context, but many others just stuck to that old past, and it makes it really difficult. It makes it challenging to meet the 21st century skills, which we'll be looking at later on. So, we look at the value, the importance of higher education as something that lifts up students and society by educating leaders, building healthy communities, and making discoveries that save lives and improve standards of living. And so when you think about the role of higher education, then you can then reflect in terms of what will happen if there was no higher education. In a knowledge-based economy, I mean, it's just impossible for a country to function without higher education, because look at it in terms of engineers. Where will engineers come from? Where will they be trained? What quality? When you think about the competence of even the work they will be doing. So when you go to tar or to pave the roads, and the roads you do it, and when rain falls and it sweeps off the pavement, what do you think you have done? Where is the problem? Is the problem as a result of incompetence in civil engineering, or it's just because there is that bad faith and people have swindled the money and not spent enough in buying cement and doing the right mixture? It's a combination of several problems, issues that we can consider, but we are looking at it more from the curriculum standpoint, competency. And so we are looking at how effective are universities and colleges in preparing students for increasing knowledge economies. Is investing in hiring and infrastructure enough? If we say we are investing in higher education, are we investing too in the curriculum? Are we investing in professional development to ensure that the kind of learning that is taking place, the kind of teaching that is taking place is transformative, is having the impact that is desired by the society? And if we're talking about infrastructure, how are we designing the infrastructure? How are the classrooms being designed? What kind of tables, desks, chairs are we using in the classrooms? Are they fostering 21st century skills? Do they allow for collaborative learning? If not, then we are just designing a structure that fosters the transmission approach, which is lecture-based type of learning, which studies have shown do not have much impact on the learners, because they just memorize the skills and regurgitate in the tests and validate the course without necessarily acquiring the competencies that are required for knowledge workers, because everyone going through higher education is acquiring skills to become knowledgeable in their field, whether you will be a knowledge worker working for someone or working for yourself or contributing to the society. The value that is, when you think about higher education, while you're there, it has to have an impact. It shouldn't be you take a course and once you pass the course, you forget completely what the course was talking about. Okay, and so the theoretical framework comes from transformative education theory that was propounded by Jacques Mezirow in the 90s, and mostly started out in higher education, but not in adult education, but many other researchers have seen the need for these two, for transformative education, transformative learning theories to transfer to other sectors or other areas in higher education, because although learning is, education is designed to transform minds, as researchers have come to realize that that is not really happening. If that's not happening, what's the problem? What's the cause of that? Is it how we design the curriculum, or is it how we deliver the curriculum? That is how we teach, or both? And those are some of the questions that my ongoing research has been attempting to answer. So with transformative learning theory, the goal is to master the skills and apply them, master and be able to transfer those skills and apply them in real life contexts. And that is why we talk more about competencies and less about objectives. And you can see, if you following closely what is going on in schools, there is a lot of discussion about, in higher education, there is more discussion in Africa about competency-based approach to learning, so that they really have to be able to transfer those skills and apply them in real life situations. And in this case, students are taught to develop proficiency and apply these skills to solve problems. So problem-solving skills become very critical. And if you think about the OECD countries with their PISA programs, the kind of test, how they test students is basically going by competency. That is, they are not just going, if you are testing students in mathematical or quantitative reasoning, they are not just testing them on the numbers, testing how to transfer those numbers and apply them in solving problems. And then looking at, in the curriculum context, how are these competencies assessed? How do we go about assessing them in a way that we can really measure quality learning taking place, rather than just measuring regurgitation and so on. And so with knowledge economy, and I'm bringing this back again because it's very important for us higher education educators, or educators in general, to think about what is going on in our society, in our communities, and so on. How are we in tune? How are our curricula in tune with the realities in the society? And if we are not doing that, then we remain disconnected and we fall behind in many respects. And our students will be less competitive in this globally interconnected world, where you can sit here and apply for a job and work in Germany and work in different parts of the world. Okay, and so one of those skills that are highly emphasized, that's highly emphasized in 21st century skills, is classroom collaboration. Classroom, we want people to collaborate in the workplaces. If you see like this COVID-19 vaccines, so on, most of the time, those vaccines were not invented by single individuals, group of researchers. They contribute ideas in the laboratory. And how do we help students to begin to work? How do we, they're future professionals, and if they don't start that collaboration in the classrooms, it becomes really difficult to do it at the workplace. So that's what these images, the classroom collaboration here shows, and then the collaboration at work. Let's see, in the first picture, you can see Zuckerberg here with his co-workers or his workers. And nobody doubts what they have been doing in terms of revolutionizing social media. And on the other side, this is what is happening at Google. And so how much is happening, especially in the context of Africa, where I've been doing this research, because a lot of these things, collaboration is not happening in the classroom, partly because the classrooms are not even designed for students to move around. And that's why I said if we're in financing education and we are just building more classrooms, but we are not being thoughtful about how we even equip the classrooms and so on, then we are just still stuck in the past and how we doing things. So with 21st century skills, there are a range of skills that can help professionals navigate career in the modern workplace, as well as help a country prepare its citizens for a competitive global economy. And it's important because it makes students more marketable and valuable, not only to the employers, but also to the society. And if we are taking this into consideration when we are designing our curriculum, then we're beginning to see more transformative impact on our graduates, our college or university graduates. And so some of those specific skills include they include higher order thinking, complex communication, critical literacy skills, quantitative reasoning skills that are transferable in different contexts, collaborative, that is ability to work with teams, then the ability to investigate and solve problems. Investigate, that is doing research, do inquiry, and solve problems. That is really what transpires in classrooms in Finland, which has had one of the best educational systems for so many years around in Europe and in the world. So, and then teaching skills that that relates to adaptability to change, and ability to be creative and innovative, ability to engage in learning new things at all times. And that will stem from teachers or professors to being innovative and engaging students. So if we are teaching to the text, we come in, we recommend a text and students buy, and we come in, we go from page to page, then we are not preparing the students for creative and innovative skills, and which is really problematic and that slows the economy, slows the country down overall, because students' time is basically wasted and obtaining a piece of paper that doesn't have much impact on their lives and for the economy of the country. If you consider that many of these countries subsidize, especially third world countries, they subsidize higher education heavily. They subsidize because they are banging on the students coming back to contribute to the development of the country. So, and then also considering the ability to cross-specialize in different areas, disciplines, that is interdisciplinary skills in this context, global awareness, diversity awareness, preparing the students in this area across the various disciplines, because they will end up, they may be working with people or collaborating with folks from different parts of the world to find solutions to problems plaguing humanity overall. Then, there's technological skills that are required as well, and critical, as we all know. And there may be a couple of other 21st century skills to consider. And this is something that I see it as something that can be infused across the board. That is, we take all these things into consideration when we sit down to design our courses, whether we are in mathematics, sociology, environmental sciences, history, civic education, and so on. So if we have this—
1 minute left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, you passed 15 minutes.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. Yes, that's the problem too with talking with a lot of passion. You just keep going, you forget you are in the classroom in a different context. Anyway, but I was at the end of my presentation, and in this context here, when we talk about the transformative learning activities in the 21st century, we see the curriculum as the link pin of education that goes hand in hand with pedagogy, so you don't decouple curriculum and instruction, they go hand in hand. And so we think about place-based, project-based, and problem-based learning. We look at service and community-based learning, where students are out there in the field, they are not always stuck in the classroom. Collaborative experiences, whether that will involve research, observation, and inquiry. And then we think about intensive writing. Communication is critical. You cannot be a professional or a knowledge worker and you don't have good writing skills. Whether you are writing in your local language, mother tongue, or English, French, or whatever, you have to be able to communicate effectively. And the curriculum should be testing those skills, should have activities that promote these skills, because when they do, then we are maximizing learning outcomes for learners. Let me stop here. Thank you. Are you speaking? You are muted.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. It's fascinating, and you're right. Sometimes you follow the flow and you forget that there is a time constraint. So, but I think we will try to catch up with the next speakers by asking them to be brief and to remain on time. And thank you so much. And I think there's something you said that I think is very important. So I would just summarize, because the issue is not to teach students to pass exams, but to teach them to acquire a transformative knowledge, and based on the kind of skills you mentioned, at the end of your presentation. And there is also one takeaway idea is your concluding words when you say that, well, the training should be focused on, it should be a problem-based training, a community-based training, but also intensive writing, which is also a critical skill when it's come to producing knowledge. And thank you so much. So we'll have more time to come, to come again on this conversation.
So maybe I didn't want to say anything, but again, something came twice. We were two presenters. The need to introduce and develop service and community-based learning. Again, this is absolutely lacking in our system of education, and connecting the student in all levels of education to the community, helping them find where they can be helpful to their community. This is extremely important, and this is what develops citizenship and nationhood. We'll come back, as you said, on these issues after the third presenter.
Absolutely, a good transition, because Khadija will talk about creating framework that incorporate aspects of African indigenous teaching methods into classroom curricula and from the African worldview.
Absolutely.
Khadija is a Stanford Graduate School of Education student, researcher, podcast host, and conference organizer. Currently a Fulbright US ETAs in Cote d'Ivoire, where she teaches at Lycée Saint-Marie. So Khadija, are you here? Can you hear us?
Hi, I am here. Very good to see you again. Thank you so much for having me. I'm wondering, would you like me to do the presentation from my end, or did you receive my upload?
Well, you can take the lead.
Okay, I can go ahead and do that. Do I have screen sharing access? Give me 1 minute.
See the
Pardon
green.
me.
Okay, so you see the green icon on the screen down?
I do. I think my computer setting isn't set for it. So give me 1 minute to change the settings so I can get started with you guys shortly. Thank you for your patience. Green. Here we are, and we are good to go. Okay, so again, good afternoon to you all in West Africa. I am currently in California, so it is morning. Thank you guys for making the time to be here and the space to be here. Again, my name is Khadija. I go by Cento, and today I will be talking about both the relevance of Indigenous knowledge in West Africa, as well as sort of having a conversation with you guys and brainstorming on the best ways to start to incorporate those Indigenous knowledge. So where do we start? This is obviously a map of Africa, and most of the time when I'm speaking, I will be referring to the western part of Africa. And my story really started when I was in Uganda doing a policy research as a policy assistant or a research assistant. And I had one of my coworkers say that the white man writes our history better than us. And I was stunned by that because it felt as if I was still very much in colonial Africa. So that is where my journey started. And the goal of my current research right now and the journey that it has taken from Uganda to Ghana and to Cote d'Ivoire is to really determine the relevance of Indigenous knowledge, the methods of transmission in the current West African curricula. And I will have to say that I am biased because I am Sierra Leonean and from West Africa, hence the heavy focus on West Africa. And so this presentation will define what West African knowledge is, as broad as it is, illustrate methods in which, you know, as most of us know, colonialism disrupted our education system, and then assess the current education system and finally determine roles of traditional education. So again, what is Indigenous knowledge? And according to Safadia, Indigenous knowledge is unique to a given culture and society, reflecting common sense ideas, cultural and society resources of local people concerning everyday realities. And I think this is so important to highlight, given that Africa, the continent in general, but even our regions, and then our countries are not homogeneous. I was recently living in Cote d'Ivoire, and the amount of ethnic groups and languages that are there are vastly different and have different ways about going about life. And so it is important for us to be able to cater our knowledge to, one, be representative of these communities that we are working in, but figure out ways to collaborate so that we have that global outlook as well. So it's finding a nice middle. Again, what are some methods of knowledge transmission? They include all sorts of things. I know growing up, I had oral literature that I didn't really think was oral literature until I started getting into academia, but fables, myths, and proverbs. Language, of course, is a carrier of culture. And so the mode in which you communicate can also help inform the transmission of the culture that you have. Music and dance, in lots of ways, it can be spiritual, therapeutic, and used for creative purposes. And in terms of like theory and practice, we have interdisciplinary vocational approaches. And we do see a lot of vocational schools. African science and technology, I know that. And again, as I talk through my research, it will be more of a storytelling process. So for example, with African science and technology, I recall my grandmother taking me to, I guess a medicine man is what we call it. And, trying to find medicine for an ailment that I had. And looking at that from my perspective, I was like, I should be going to a hospital. But what is so important to see is that the two of them can exist in our context as West Africans. And then, of course, lastly, elderly instruction. So bridging that gap between generations, especially with globalization and the Western world living side by side with our cultures and traditions. So how do we continue to encourage individuals to be able to hold on to the cultures that we have and also embrace globalization? I feel like I'm not going to reread what's on the PowerPoint, but rather just explain further. And so with a lot of traditional practices, the goal is to create lifelong learners, not just people who can acquire a job, which in my personal observation, the current education system that we have, and specifically speaking about primary and secondary education, creates learners that are only ready to find a job. And I would argue that while that is absolutely important, I think that from the African perspective, an all-encompassing education is one where a person is a whole human being that comes out and is sensitive to the needs of their family, of their community. And that is how that solution finding and problem solving occurs. So with the impact of colonialism, I feel like we all know this, but of course there was the erosion of a lot of our native tongues. For me in particular, I struggle with being able to speak like my mother tongue, because there's English and then there's Creole within my country. So by the time I get to the third language, it's something that's slightly different. Religion, we have external religions that have led to the erosion of the diversity of traditional practices that we had. And then finally, the African narrative. I can definitely say that within my generation, a lot of people, we look outside, we look to what Europe is doing consistently, what America is doing consistently. And sort of we've been engaged in such a way that we believe that the outside is far better than what is within us. And I would argue that that isn't true, but figuring out ways to be able to change that narrative is absolutely important, and I'm dedicated to that. And so just to summarize what the impact of colonialism was, as Ngugi wa Thiago, a Kenyan theorist, said, is it's a cultural bomb, and it's a type of bomb that not only dismembers the cultural fabric of colonized subjects, but also makes the subject despise his or her own culture through a process of alienation. And I can say that I've seen this vividly in a lot of the African countries that I have lived in, whether it's issues like colorism or the brain drain that we experience in our African countries. These are all symptoms of that colonial experience. And so what is the current state of education in West Africa? Well, in a lot of our countries, not all, I know, for example, Ghana teaches in the native tongues, but in a lot of our countries, we see Eurocentrism in the schools. We see colonial languages as the mode of instruction. We see that, there's school closure due to conflict within regions, where we have almost 31 million children who are currently not in school. And economic and societal and gender status greatly impact the ability of a child to receive education. And then our biggest one, I would say, is the urban-rural inequality, where 52% of West African schooling children are in rural areas, but do not have access to the adequate resources to be able to succeed, especially when all of them take the baccalaureate or the WASCE exam at the very end. And so in this specific research, I use semi-structured phone research, interviews, and I was focused specifically in Ghana. And as I transitioned to Cote d'Ivoire, I sort of did a comparative approach to the research, but specifically in Ghana, we had 4 individuals who represented different communities. So academics at the University of Ghana, we had community leaders in villages that are figuring out and finding solutions to the lack of resources that they have, but still are able to produce students who are well educated and are thriving within their schools. And, you know, all of this information was transcribed and coded. And here are a few of my sample questions. You know, how would you describe the national education system? What are strengths and weaknesses, and so on. And so as I was coding the data, you know, we separated them into different aspects. We have the challenges, we have the sources of the challenges, the impact of those challenges, and of course, the paths to solution. So some of our challenges included just within the current school system, you know, there is a lot of Eurocentrism. There is rote memorization within the current school system. And then trying to understand what exactly is a traditional education system and what does that look like for a specific community? On a policy scale, we saw challenges, and on a societal scale, we saw that just as a society, as Africans, you know, I would say that after 500 plus years of just what I would consider turmoil, there is a back and forth of what is our culture authentically and what parts have been infused in different ways. And then just looking at the sources of the challenges, and again, the impact, what consequences have they caused? And then how can we facilitate solutions? I think this just goes further into my data analysis process. And the results of the research is that on a policy and curricula level, our systems are heavily dependent on international institutions, which then sort of reinforce this Eurocentric approach of teaching and Eurocentric methods of curriculum design, and it does not really give much room for the localization of knowledge. And then we noticed that in the research, teacher education and motivation was a big thing, which I know that the Sustainable Development Goals are really working to address. And in terms of traditional education, some of the challenges that we saw was an intergenerational understanding. I would say that maybe the older generation in a lot of our countries see the newer generations sometimes as not wanting to know the culture, and then vice versa, right? So how do we open that space for intergenerational dialogue? And then of course, from a societal view, we saw some issues with what is known as the white gaze of success and what success looks like and what we've been taught success to look like. And then that cultural memory loss that I would say a lot of African countries have. And the sources of some of these challenges include the curriculum, what is being taught in class and how it's being taught in class. So for example, in one of the lessons I had to teach in Cote d'Ivoire in my classroom was on village women. And unfortunately, the way that the curriculum was written did not elevate village women, but rather disempower them. And so we had to think of ways of, you know, how can we show that a lot of women within their communities are actually leaders. They're finding solutions for illnesses. They're ensuring that the gender inequality in education are being resolved. So that on a curriculum level, how we're portraying our cultures and our systems, that city and urban or city and rural divide, that was big in terms of the sources of our challenges, again, societal, and just looking at the fact that we as countries and as schools do not analyze the impact of colonialism, but rather sort of just are in a storytelling mode. And then lack of resources. In the rural areas that I have worked in West Africa, a lot of students do not have access to books. A lot of students do not have access to basic necessities for school. And so those factors all impact the ability for students to learn. And so our results show that our path to solution really starts with a policy conversation. So we need to start having conversation on the policy level, but also on the local level, where we have communities that are coming in and parents feel as if they have a say in their children's education, rather than sending them to a school. And a lot of the times parents might not necessarily understand what their students are learning, and it creates this divide. But what we're hoping to do is create a community of learning where teachers and parents can collaborate, and policy leaders can also all collaborate. So limitations within this specific study was the length of study. We had to keep it at 5 months due to just the geographical location. And then it was also quarantine COVID time. So that led to us not being able to fly out to the country. And again, just some recommendations for this specific research is that Indigenous knowledge should be implemented within the curriculum, and then intergenerational conversations need to be had about colonialism specifically and its impact, and then on all levels, both government and community. So then what is next in this specific research guideline that I've been giving you guys is, what does incorporating Indigenous knowledge, what that could look like? So my specific aim right now is to create a framework that uses Indigenous methods to teach math, science, and language. So those 3 specific subjects in primary school. African and local Indigenous knowledge are broad and can differ by region and country, as I expressed earlier, and even ethnic group. And what I hope to do is to create frameworks that can fit any structure and be personalized to a specific environment. And I hope to do this from a bottom.
Hadija, you got 1 minute left.
Thank you so much. I hope to do this from a bottom line approach, meaning working specifically with rural areas, which tend to not have as much resources, and then expanding that. And I'll just wrap it up really quickly. Our next steps here are actually heading to Côte d'Ivoire, to the Mont region of Côte d'Ivoire, to begin exploring what does African science and what does mathematics look like, and then and what that could potentially look like in the classroom. Again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. And I am huge on having my qualitative research specifically be sort of a storytelling piece and a conversation. So I invite your pushbacks, I invite your criticism, and I invite your questions. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen. I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if you're speaking.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna be just a comment, listening to you, but also listening to the previous presenters. It seems to me that there is also an ontological question regarding the purpose of education. What's the purpose? Is it should it be a socially oriented education or a market-oriented education? So these are questions that we will discuss maybe at the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
So
just to say, we got approximately 15 minutes for Cinder and 15 minutes for my jam, and maybe we might, if we are lucky, 10 minutes for discussion, because we are going to wrap up at 5. So maybe staying within the confines of a 15 minutes would do us a lot of good. Next time.
Thank you. Professor, we start with Cindy.
Cindy Obai.
Cindy Cooper.
Hi, sure. I don't know if you can hear me.
So we can hear you very well.
Hi. Okay, so I will also be sharing a screen, and I probably will not take the 15 minutes. So that will give us more time for discussion. I would like to just say, as I begin to share, I think if I can do that, not sure what you are seeing, but I wanted to really kind of speak to some of what your Fulbright panelist was saying, but also just a little bit about what we do when we lead faculty to work there in West Africa and some of the considerations that we make. So we were asked to speak on education and curriculum development, and I wanted to really kind of focus on a decolonized approach. And I know that Dr. Jillian Martin talked about this as well. And so too did Dr. Samura. So I wanted to kind of piggyback off of some of what they were saying. So just to here, I'm going to be sharing this link. This link here really points to the American Association of Colleges and Universities Global Value Rubric, Global Learning Rubric. And it touches on some of the points that you all made. I'm not going to go here, but as I share this PowerPoint, you can certainly click on this link to see the AAC&U's Global Learning Values Rubric that you can use to start infusing global learning into your classes and make sure that students can really start meeting some of those benchmarks. What I wanted to talk a little bit about as we start to think about decolonizing and our curriculum and really infusing West Africa into the curriculum is this quote that I saw in a course that I was taking in a book that I read for this course this couple semesters ago. And it is that history shows us that the modern Western university was erected as an institution fundamentally antagonistic to everyday people in general and people of color in particular. And so thinking about that, even if we are talking about universities in Africa and universities in the United States, a lot of these universities really have a Western model that they are looking at. So how do we approach education of our students, particularly those of color, indigenous students, to really embrace who they are and the histories and culture that are embedded in their environments. So I know Dr. Cham is going to talk more about Keyork and Warwick and the faculty development seminars, but I wanted to just mention briefly what we try to do when we bring faculty to Keyork and the West African Research Center in Dakar. We want to integrate and infuse West Africa into higher education curriculum in the US. And of course, that does not mean just in the US, that is everywhere. We want to think specifically about community colleges, minority serving institutions, and PWIs, and how do we make our stories centered and not peripheral to the courses. And so as a community college faculty member, I'm looking at introductory and survey courses that have been heavily prescribed with a Western kind of context. And so even for my American literature course, for example, I started to focus really on immigrant voices, because that is a part of the American story that is really not in the canonized literary anthologies. So we're looking to how do we infuse the cultures that make up the United States into the curriculum so students see themselves there. We also want to make sure that there is an understanding of colonialism in the present higher education system in the US and in other systems as well. So we say that we are thinking post-colonially, but there is still colonialism really entrenched in higher education system in the US, and of course, also in K-12 systems. And so we understand that this is happening and that there is this fight to continue that in our education systems, as we see politicians fighting against CRT in K-12 when it really isn't there, but certainly still fighting in including those stories that aren't generally told. So we also focus on, in those FDS program, faculty development programs, seminars, decolonizing the curriculum, and we provide tools and resources that are available there as people start to see West Africa in a way that they may not have. And so we are deconstructing what they have been taught, and really interrogating the information that they have and reconstructing them. So when we start thinking about what do we mean by decolonize, for me, it is decentering hegemonic models of education. It is telling those other stories, right? And I think Professor Samora mentioned this as well. It is about what is the African traditional knowledge look like, knowledge building. How can we include that in the curriculum? So it is very important for us to really get away from just having one story told, one perspective told. And we also mean by decolonizing is deminoritizing curriculum. And that means that even if we are in the majority in a lot of places, the curriculum looks to us as being minoritized. So we might be the majority, but the way that education is set up, we are really put in a position where our stories are minoritized or peripheral to the real events that happen. And so we also want to think about counter-narrative inclusivity. So again, really going on to what Dr. Samora was saying, how do we include our story? Storytelling is very important to counter that hegemonic perspective of history. And so when we think about the curriculum in education, that is part of our focus. So when we were running the NEH workshop together this summer, Dr. Cham had this really wonderful presentation that he talked about film and literature. And of course, we were talking about the diaspora, which is important in this conversation as well. But something that he mentioned that stuck with me, and hopefully he'll talk a little bit about it because I'm going to give him a lot of time to do that, is that creative, historical, and cultural landscapes of West African and diasporic history is about continuities, transformations, and ruptures. And so again, if we start looking at the curriculum as being kind of a foundation to address these things, then it's going to be important. So we think about pre-colonial, before Western intervention, before Western interruption and rupture, how do we teach our students about power, economics, politics, religion, culture? And then we can think also about post-colonial, again, investigating that relationship and that rupture, but also the continuities, what lasted, what permeated, what still exists, even with the interruption of colonialism or coloniality. So we can think about all of those things as we continue to develop our curricula, knowing that when we do, we are really going against the grain. So our universities aren't always set up for us to explore these kinds of questions as it relates to post-colonialism or pre-colonialism. And so when we think about all of these, I want us to consider, how we include our students in these discussions. How do we include them in the storytelling? How do we make them a part of the curricula? And that's a part of decolonization. Very briefly, I wanted to go to Dr. Michael, who talked about 21st century skills as well. And part of that, again, is related to the AAC&U Global Value Learning rubric about service learning, about being in the community, about making sure that communities know that their history has value and that it did not just begin with the colonial interruption. So that is my take on what I've heard today. And if you have any questions after Professor Cham talks, we can certainly circle back to some of the comments. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cinda. This is wonderful. So, but without transition, so we'll give the floor to Professor May Chams, so that we can have more time for discussion. Professor Cham.
Yes, thank you, Mamadou, and thank you, Aliun and Usman. I think this is a very important session here, giving us, Cinda, can you take your, so, thanks, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Gives us an opportunity to just learn. I mean, I'm learning a whole lot, actually, and really seeing the ways that many of the comments and interventions that have been made are connected to, you know, long processes that have been going on, not just on the African continent, but in the United States here also, around debates around curriculum content and things of that nature there. So thank you very much for organizing this. I'll be very brief. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because I think Cinda covered basically most of the ground in relation to, you know, the our own experience of working with community college teachers and others from minority serving institutions in the United States here, within the context of West Africa, particularly in Senegal, and trying to really give them the opportunity to engage on the ground some of these things that maybe they have been exposed to theoretically and from a distance. So I think this is something that is quite important here. I really enjoyed all of the presentations, actually, and I think there are some very interesting connections, very interesting areas in which they converge in a lot of ways to throw light again on some of these questions that are long running in terms of debates around curriculum in Africa in particular, and also in the United States here. And you know, they all sort of hover around or coalesce around these issues of quality, of access, of infrastructure and resources, and also in relation to the actual content of what it is that we teach, what it is that we try to cultivate, not just in terms of empirical data, empirical learning, but also in terms of skills development. And I think this is something that I took away from Michael's presentation, which again, sort of comes together very nicely with Gillian's comments from the beginning, talking about really, you know, not just, you know, conveying facts and figures and data, so to speak, but cultivating a certain sort of orientation towards developing certain skills that can travel, skills that are transferable, you know. And right now you hear in many discourses around policy, for example, in African countries, you know, a lot of talk about STEM, right? A lot of talk about making sure that the education that's being provided is relevant, is in line with what employers require and need. And I think the point that Khadija made, or the question that she raised, again here is quite important in terms of, are you getting an education only to get a job, right? Or are you getting an education to, you know, do something else? And I think the quote that you invoked from Omoyela's book, I think is quite important here. So in relation to developing these skills that are that can travel, right, regardless of where you are geographically and in terms of space, okay. Again, these are really critical issues, okay. And developing these skills, right, and making sure that these skills are things that you can adapt, that you can, that are malleable, to be able to absorb, to be able to deal with specific areas such as technology, right, such as science, mathematics, engineering, arts, okay, the humanities, and so on and so forth. You know, I think that emphasis on developing these skills is really quite significant. And I think the list that Michael provided, that those 21st century skills, you know, which are very flexible, again, will give that foundation, will give that sort of a template from which people can begin to really engage these questions of what is it that we should be doing about education, about educational reforms, particularly in African countries. And again, as I said, these debates around reforms are long-standing, right? If you take, for example, the case of Ghana that Gillian started out with, okay? I mean, this has been one of those priority areas that Nkrumah, from the very beginning, back in '57, you know, tried to devote a lot of attention to. And you can multiply these efforts in various other African countries, you know. But what has been the result? What has been the result? It's an ongoing process. It's not something that produces sort of the desired results and impact overnight, right? So these are things that unfold over time. And there are certain iterations, certain twists and turns that these things take, and they're continuously in the process of unfolding, of becoming, taking on different patterns, given the sort of situations that are that are in hand. Okay, so it is very interesting for me to see the specific sort of touchstones, you know, that have been invoked here by the various speakers, right? And the ways that these specific issues have manifested themselves over time, from a very, very early stage since African independences, and these efforts to come up with reforms, you know, to really provide the kind of education that is very much in sync with the realities on the ground, and also that are appropriate for developing the kinds of competencies that are needed, not just for individual development, but also for the collective social, political, economic transformation of these countries here. So I want to just congratulate everybody for sharing these very interesting ideas, and I can go on and on in terms of certain specific issues here, but hopefully in the few minutes that we have left here, might be able to engage in an exchange, a dynamic exchange that will make us engage in a little bit more detail some of these very critical questions that are still very much part and parcel of the policy discourses and policy actions of different African countries. There's hardly an African country that is not being subject to these kinds of debates and ongoing sort of policy actions, towards reform, towards creating, that optimal, I don't know if there's anything that could be labeled as optimal, but towards creating the kind of systems that are conducive and appropriate to the sort of development goals that are pretty much on the top of the priority list of many of these African countries here. So thank you very much, Usman. Thank you very much, Aliun and Mamadou, for providing this platform here. And thank you for all the Fulbright presentations here, and really quite educational for me. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Maicham, and thank you for all the presenters. And I think we pretty much, did a tour of the question, and I think there's a lot of issues that have been raised, critical questions on education policy and practices, but also the kind of purpose they will serve. And I think we also talk about the quality, access, infrastructure, content. But there is two issues that you've raised that I think are very important. It's developing skills, whether in humanities, but also STEM, if you want. But the other thing is adaptation and innovation, which means that these are two critical things to consider, whether content, but also infrastructure, but also the kind of knowledge and skills we need to develop a very, very innovative human capital. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. What kind of skills, but also what kind of knowledge are we building in our education systems to make sure that that knowledge, but also those skills will be useful for the society, not only useful for the job market, but the society as well. So I will open the floor to
somebody has been raising here.
His hand. Ogundayo.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
Greetings to my big brother, Professor Cham, and to my two sisters. I'd like to preface my comment with this. There's a big elephant sitting in the room, and that is Nigeria. Since February, the universities have been shut down.
Right.
And we have the Speaker of the House taking a course in Harvard and showing off with that. So that's my preface. Second, I'm so grateful for, the interventions of my two sisters just before Professor Cham. This question of decentering, decolonizing. Let's start with the low-hanging fruits. As practitioners of the teaching, of the art of teaching, shaping minds and influencing people. How about a course called African Thinkers? Let's put Sheikh Anta Diop, Amadou Bamba, and for gender balance, let's find African female thinkers and make that a course. That's one. Two, even in our bibliographies, whether it is physics, chemistry, biology, let's start looking for African or Africana or Black intellectuals who have contributed, such as you, Professor Cham, such as, the beloved Senghor, such as, how about, including in the curriculum, the very question of the university, the identity. We can talk about Timbuktu. So the discourse will match the curriculum. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And if it comes to computer science or STEM, we can look at accounting systems across Africa and make that, if you are teaching mathematics, there's a book, very interesting book titled Ethno-Mathematics. We can make it part of the curriculum. So we don't necessarily have to essentialize Africa, but we don't also have to just import Euro-America and its practices. After all, we are the cradle of civilization, of humanity. So again, curriculum development. Let's start with low-hanging fruit. African thinkers who have contributed to making Africa more respected. Let's make it a course. And thank God for Zoom. We can even replicate this and teach them online. Okay? And then in our bibliographies, if we are doing research, those of us who are supposed to be the intellectual leaders, I will just get off by saying, I wanted to do research on the African epic. I started by working on the French epic. And in those days of MLA database, I went to UB, by the way, Professor Cham. Guess what? I typed French epic poetry. I came up with almost 14,000 bibliographic items. And then I said to myself, why should I come all the way from Africa and still be talking about the French? I removed the word French. I put African epic poetry. Guess how many items I came up with? Just 4. One of which described it as African folk tales. So we have to be willing to even change the way we think about what we teach, about how we present what we teach, about who we cite as authorities. And this is where indigenous knowledge comes in. Thank you. Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ogundayo. So we'll ask the next interveners to be brief, 2 minutes each, so that we can give the presenter the opportunity to respond to the questions.
Yeah, let's say we got 14 minutes.
Yeah,
we have 4 minutes to wrap up from here. So 10 minutes discussion. Anybody would like to take the floor?
Well, I just want to.
Go.
Yeah. Okay. I think what Brother Ogundayo was saying is quite on point here, and very much in line with Khadija's call, for engaging, the indigenous systems, indigenous knowledge systems, and it relates also quite nicely to Cinder's notion of decentering, minoritizing, and eventually decolonizing. Right? Some years back, I was sort of asked by, the World Bank to do a study on how to integrate sort of oral traditions, some aspects of indigenous knowledge into educational systems. How do you open up the educational systems so that you can begin to get to, I guess, what Gillian is calling this critical hybridity, how do you bring these parallel systems into a productive conversation, right? And I think this is this goes beyond really just sector, like the education sector. But I mean, if you look at it in a broader sort of perspective, you can see the ways in which development paradigms, for example, development projects, all right, are sort of deficient in the ways in which, to the extent to which, they are designed away from the cultural logics, the cultural realities of those spaces where they're supposed to have an impact, those spaces where they're supposed to be taking root, okay? So if there's that disconnect, then you begin to see the limitations and the failures of some of these development paradigms, these development projects, precisely because they tend to ignore and erase, the systems, the indigenous systems that could make them sustainable and take root and be foundational within those communities there. So I think you're quite on point there to make this call for ways in which to creatively think and think about, and also begin to work to implement in very concrete and productive ways. This fund of knowledge that is buried, so to speak, within our own indigenous spaces. You mentioned key thinkers there, Sheikh Anta Diop, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, and you can multiply them, looking also at the gender perspectives, the women, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and I think it's very, very important to make sure that we don't check our culture at the door of the school. Okay, we don't close off the cultural realities of those spaces at the door of the school, right? Khadija, you did mention Ngugi wa Thiong'o, but Ngugi has these long stories about the ways in which the colonial authorities sort of tried to make sure that there was this exclusion of our indigenous systems, our indigenous languages, from these schools. And I'm sure Usman and maybe Pap and Mamadou, you guys are too young, but I'm sure Usman, you probably do remember this notion of this symbol, where indigenous languages where it was a crime, so to speak. It was criminalized to be caught speaking your own indigenous language within the school premises. So these are things, again, we may think of them as being sort of unconnected to curriculum, unconnected to education, but these are things that are within our cultural logic, within our cultural fabric, and we need to make sure that they are woven into whatever it is that we're doing, from education and so on and so forth. Okay.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Well, yes, you're right. The symbol. Actually, it was the shoulder of a cow, the bone, and passing it around. Whenever you hear somebody speaking the indigenous languages, you tell them, get the symbol, and you can keep it overnight. And the next day when you come, you can be beaten up by your primary school teacher for speaking local languages. So, those kind of practice, which we knew, which we experienced, history or geography lessons, you would know more about France than you would know about your own country. It is only with my kids that I realized that efforts were being made in history classes to teach our various kings and the African kings. But before, for us, everything related to France, the rivers, the castle, etc., etc. So we've gone a long way. There have been many changes, but there are still changes to come. And Mamadou, this workshop was so very rich that I think that it could even be developed into a fully fledged Fulbright conference to really have many more presentations on this topic. The papers given were extremely rich, and the issue raised extremely important, right? Even the way in which Western schooling, colonial schooling, not only disrupted our social fabric, the way in which external religion, as you said, Khadija, disrupted our social fabric. My identity, for instance, relate to my mother, not to my father. Mm-hmm. I belong to the group of my mother, the extremely determining role and importance of the woman in African society was just pushed aside by Christianity and Islam. Because now, before you would inherit from your uncle. Now you directly inherit from your father. Your uncle, your maternal uncle, was as important or even sometimes more important than your own dad, right? Your mother's elder sister, elder brother was important because of a very important role played by your mother, who would, through her breast, transmit your identity. It was your mother's breast transmitting identity and not your father's belt. But this has been just changed by French colonization. And I should say that Islam also projects the father as the major determinant factor in the family. So all these are disruptions which we suffered, and sometimes we don't think about them. And all the methodological issues you brought in, I think I told this story to Boya. I was surprised one day with one of my colleagues at the Department of English telling me, Prof, you are the only one giving course description. If you don't give course description to your student, how are they going to know what they are going next week? You come, you bring your bag, you recite your course, nobody budges, nobody moves. You take your bag, stuff your papers in your bag and go. No room for interaction, no room for discussion, no room for questions. From top to down. This is still the teaching method in most African countries, right? And how to build the confidence in the pupils, secondary, primary school, and university, if already you don't give some sense of responsibility to the student by making them actively participate in the conversation in the classroom. Actually, maybe I am wrong to talk about conversation. It's more like a monologue, right? So all those things are really things we need to talk about. And, these are questions which just challenge all African countries. So really, again, I think we don't have much left. Maybe if we can conclude here, saying that, again, this topic we should not drop it. We should think about how to enlarge this topic and maybe turn it into some Fulbright conference involving all the Fulbrighters and some, more papers, 50, 100 papers being presented, and maybe go towards some publication which will be useful to a Fulbright program, but which will be extremely useful to African decision makers. This would be a major contribution. So I see Catherine on the screen. I don't know what it is going to do. So if you allow, I would like really to thank Mamadou, Marianne, and Aliun for making this happen and for making this happen in a very professional and smooth way. Cinda and Mbaye, thank you very much for your time, and the presenters and all the participants. Thank you for making this happen. We are very proud. I think you are more than 20 people on the screen. This is great. And we are willing to do it again. Unless there are any special observation, I would like perhaps to consider that this is the wrapping up of this seminar, which because of your engagement, commitment, and civic and community engagement has been a very, very productive exercise. So thank you, everybody, and to the next workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director. I think you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Same to you guys. All right.
Yeah, thank you
All
so
the
much.
best
We
in your
are caught up
project.
in time. But
Thank
as,
you all.
Director Osman said, so we're gonna think about having a full-fledged Fulbright conference on education and curriculum development or in policy. So we'll see how to frame the issue, but we should definitely have something broader than this conversation we already started. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Secretary.